I never thought my maiden name would become both my greatest shame and my ultimate redemption. That's how life works sometimes. The very thing you're running from becomes your shield. My son-in-law Mark thought he'd found the perfect ammunition when he Googled my past. He'd been needling me for years, small digs that my daughter always excused as just his sense of humor. But that Sunday dinner, when he smirked and asked if everyone would like to hear about Caroline's colorful history, something in me finally snapped. I'd spent decades burying my past, but in that moment, I realized the only person still ashamed was me. 5 minutes after his little performance began, he was on his knees apologizing while my entire family stared in shock. Sometimes the truth doesn't just set you free, it forces everyone else to finally see you. I grew up in a small town outside of Boston where reputation was everything. My father was the high school principal, my mother ran the local church choir, and we were the family everyone looked up to, at least on paper. Behind closed doors, my father was a perfectionist with a vicious temper. Nothing I did was ever good enough. A 97 on a test? What happened to the other 3 points? First chair violin? Second-rate orchestra anyway. This constant criticism was punctuated by moments of public humiliation that still make my stomach clench when I remember them. When I was 14, I performed a solo at the regional music competition. My hands trembled as I played, but I made it through without any major mistakes, or so I thought. As the audience applauded, I saw my father standing up, not to cheer, but to leave. In the car, he dissected every imperfection in my performance, ending with, "The Callahan name means something in this town. Next time, either do it right or don't do it at all." By 16, I'd developed a rebellious streak. I fell in with a crowd my parents disapproved of, kids from the working class side of town. Among them was David Monroe, a boy with kind eyes and calloused hands from working construction with his father on weekends. He treated me like I was perfect just as I was. We dated in secret for months before my father caught us. The shouting match that followed ended with him calling David trash and me a disappointment to the Callahan name. That night, I packed a bag and ran away with David. We made it all the way to New York City with dreams of making it on our own. 2 teenagers with nothing but $240 and a backpack full of clothes. What followed was 6 months of struggle, sleeping in a car, working under-the-table jobs, and eventually the discovery that I was pregnant at 17. I called home once during that time. My mother answered, crying, begging me to come back. In the background, I heard my father, "Tell her not to bother unless she's fixed her mistake." I hung up and never called again. Instead, I made what I thought was the responsible choice. I gave up my baby for adoption through a private agency that promised my child would go to a loving, stable home. After that, David and I fell apart. He returned home to face the music, but I couldn't. I legally changed my name from Caroline Callahan to Caroline Winters, finished my GED, and slowly rebuilt my life. College, marriage to Thomas, who never asked too many questions about my past, and eventually our daughter Ellie. I created a sanitized version of my history, estranged from my family due to different values, a previous marriage that didn't work out. No mention of New York, the pregnancy, or the baby I never held. My parents passed away 10 years ago without a reconciliation. The obituaries listed me as preceded in death by daughter Caroline. Reading that, I felt a strange relief. Caroline Callahan was dead and buried. What I didn't know then was that my past wasn't as neatly sealed away as I thought. The adoption agency had closed decades ago, but somewhere out there was a child with my blood, and they had been looking for me. Last month was Ellie's 10th wedding anniversary. She and Mark decided to host a grand celebration at their lake house in the Berkshires, a sprawling property that Mark never tired of reminding everyone he'd paid for with his self-made millions in tech. The guest list included every branch of our blended family: Thomas's brothers and their wives, my stepsister Jenna, who I'd grown close to over the years, and of course, Ellie and Mark's two children, my grandkids, Sophie and Jake. I spent weeks preparing for this event, determined to make it special for Ellie. I handcrafted personalized photo albums for each guest, chronicling memories with the couple. Despite my efforts, I couldn't shake the tension I always felt around Mark. He had a way of making me feel small, constantly referencing my simple background as a community college administrator, or making jokes about my quaint middle-class tastes. "Caroline's bringing her famous potato salad," he'd announced to guests at their last gathering. "Better than the catered stuff," she says. Of course, she hasn't tried Chef Marcel's version at the Waldorf. The way he said it made my contribution sound pathetic, though Ellie just laughed it off. The morning of the anniversary party, I arrived early to help set up. The lake house was stunning in early summer, with rhododendrons blooming along the wraparound porch and the water sparkling beyond the manicured lawn. Ellie greeted me with a distracted hug, already stressed about the catering and decorations. "Mom, could you handle the place cards? Mark's added some last-minute guests, business associates he thought should be here." She didn't meet my eyes, and I knew she was anticipating my disappointment. What was supposed to be a family celebration was morphing into another networking opportunity for Mark. I was arranging flowers in the dining room when I overheard Mark on the phone in his study, the door slightly ajar. "Yeah, got some interesting dirt on the mother-in-law," he chuckled. "Always act so proper, but turns out there's quite a story there. Going to have some fun with it tonight." The way he said it made my contribution sound pathetic, though Ellie just laughed it off. The morning of the anniversary party, I arrived early to help set up. The lake house was stunning in early summer, with rhododendrons blooming along the wraparound porch and the water sparkling beyond the manicured lawn. Ellie greeted me with a distracted hug, already stressed about the catering and decorations. "Mom, could you handle the place cards? Mark's added some last-minute guests, business associates he thought should be here." She didn't meet my eyes, and I knew she was anticipating my disappointment. What was supposed to be a family celebration was morphing into another networking opportunity for Mark. I was arranging flowers in the dining room when I overheard Mark on the phone in his study, the door slightly ajar. "Yeah, got some interesting dirt on the mother-in-law," he chuckled. "Always act so proper, but turns out there's quite a story there. Going to have some fun with it tonight." My hands froze on the stems I was trimming. What could he possibly know? I'd been careful over the years, maintaining my Caroline Winters identity, keeping my past locked away. Still, the internet had a way of connecting dots that were never meant to be connected. Throughout the afternoon, Mark was unusually attentive to me, refilling my wine glass with a smirk, asking pointed questions about my youth. "So, Caroline, did you grow up around Boston? Funny, I was just reading about a family named Callahan from that area. Any relation?" His eyes glinted with malice disguised as curiosity. "No," I said firmly, heart hammering. "No relation at all." By evening, the house was filled with 60 guests, the atmosphere electric with celebration. Ellie and Mark stood together on the porch, accepting congratulations and gifts. I stayed back, nursing a single glass of champagne, watching my daughter glow with happiness, despite being married to a man who seemed to derive pleasure from others' discomfort. The tension built as dinner approached. Mark had been making a show of whispering to various guests, sending glances my way that made my skin crawl. During the appetizer course, he clinked his glass for attention. "Before we continue this wonderful celebration," he announced, "I thought it might be fun to share some family stories. After all, that's what these gatherings are about, right? Connection, history, honesty." His emphasis on honesty made my stomach drop.
Across the table, Thomas reached for my hand, sensing my distress, though not understanding its source. In fact, Mark continued, smartphone in hand, I've been doing some fascinating family research. Caroline, did you know there's quite a bit about the Callahans in Massachusetts online, including a very interesting article about a teenage girl who ran away in 1979? The room seemed to tilt. Every face turned toward me, confusion mixing with uncomfortable curiosity. Ellie looked between her husband and me, her expression shifting from bewilderment to concern. "Mark," she said quietly, "what are you doing?" But he was already swiping through his phone, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent table. "It seems our Caroline has quite a different background than the one she shared with us all these years. Different name, different story altogether." "Caroline Callahan," Mark announced, reading from his phone with theatrical flair, "daughter of the esteemed Principal Robert Callahan and choir director Elizabeth Callahan, disappeared in April 1979 with her boyfriend, a boy from the wrong side of the tracks." He looked up, smirking. "Sounds like a soap opera, doesn't it? But wait, there's more." The blood rushed to my face as 60 pairs of eyes fixed on me. Thomas squeezed my hand tighter, confusion etched across his features. Ellie had gone pale, her anniversary celebration crumbling around her. "There was quite the search," Mark continued, "police reports, newspaper articles, the works. But what's really interesting is what happened about 7 months later." He paused for effect. "A private adoption agency in New York processed paperwork for an infant. Mother's name? Caroline Callahan." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Ellie's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. No one moved to clean it up.
"Mom?" Her voice was small, hurt. "Is this true? You had a child before me?" For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Decades of carefully constructed stories, the life I'd built from the ashes of my past, all of it unraveling in seconds. Mark stood there, triumphant, clearly expecting me to crumble, to run from the room in shame. Instead, something shifted inside me. The weight I'd carried for 45 years suddenly felt different. Not lighter, but somehow redistributed. I stood slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Everything Mark just said is true. I was Caroline Callahan. I ran away at 16 with the boy I loved. We were homeless in New York. I got pregnant, and at 17, I made the hardest decision of my life." The room was utterly silent. Even Mark's smug expression had faltered slightly, perhaps disappointed by my composure. "What Mark doesn't know," I continued, looking directly at him, "is why I changed my name, why I never spoke of this. My father was abusive, emotionally, psychologically. He broke me down day after day until running away seemed like the only option. When I found out I was pregnant, I called home. My father said I'd made my bed and should lie in it, or fix my mistake." I turned to Ellie, tears streaming down her face. I wasn't ready to be a mother. I was sleeping in a car, working at a diner for cash under the table. I gave my baby up because I wanted him to have what I couldn't provide. And I changed my name because Caroline Callahan had failed at everything, as a daughter, as a girlfriend, as a mother. Mark attempted to regain control. "Well, isn't this a touching confession?" "I'm not finished," I cut him off. A lifetime of suppressed anger, giving my voice an edge I'd never allowed before. "What your research didn't tell you, Mark, is what happened after. How I put myself through school. How I built a career helping other young people find their way. How I met Thomas, who loved me without needing to tear me down to feel big." I looked around the table at the stunned faces of our family and friends. The shame isn't mine anymore. The shame belongs to people like my father, and like you, Mark, who measure their worth by how small they can make others feel. Then I turned to my daughter. Ellie, I'm sorry you had to find out this way. I should have told you long ago. There's so much more to say, but not here, not like this. I placed my napkin on the table and walked out onto the porch, the cool evening air a blessed relief against my flushed skin. Behind me, I heard the murmur of shocked voices, Ellie's angry words directed at Mark, and then Thomas's chair as he stood to follow me. Before I reached the door, I heard Mark call out, "Caroline, don't you think you're being a little dramatic? It was just an interesting piece of family history." That's when my stepsister Jenna stood up. "Mark, for God's sake, shut up. You didn't discover family history. You deliberately tried to humiliate a woman at her daughter's anniversary party. What kind of person does that?" The last thing I saw before stepping outside was the room turning against Mark, his smug certainty crumbling as he realized his grand moment had backfired completely. The party dissolved into chaos after I left. From the porch, I could hear raised voices, Ellie's the loudest among them, demanding to know what Mark had been thinking. Thomas joined me outside, wrapping his jacket around my shoulders. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, not accusingly, but with genuine confusion. "I thought you'd see me differently," I admitted. By the time I felt safe enough to share it, so many years had passed that it seemed easier to just keep it buried. We sat together on the porch swing, the celebration inside now fragmented into clusters of uncomfortable guests. Jenna brought us each a glass of water, then sat beside me. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think you're incredibly brave, both then and now." Around midnight, after most guests had awkwardly departed, Ellie found me. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her anniversary dress rumpled. Without a word, she sat beside me and laid her head on my shoulder, just as she had as a little girl. "I sent Mark to a hotel," she said finally. "I can't even look at him right now." "I'm sorry your anniversary was ruined," I whispered. She shook her head. "I'm sorry I never saw how he treated you. All those little digs, the condescending comments, I just laughed them off." She looked up at me. "But Mom, why didn't you ever tell me about my half-brother?" The words half-brother hit me like a physical blow. In all my years of secret grief, I'd never allowed myself to connect my firstborn to my daughter that way. They were separate lives, separate worlds. "I convinced myself it was kinder not to tell you," I said, but maybe I was just protecting myself. The next morning, Ellie and I sat at her kitchen table with coffee, the lake outside still shrouded in dawn mist. We talked for hours about my parents, about David, about those desperate months in New York. I showed her the one thing I'd kept, a small Polaroid of me, 17 and hollow-eyed, cradling a newborn wrapped in a hospital blanket. "I named him James," I told her, "after my grandfather, the only family member who ever showed me real kindness." "Have you ever tried to find him?" she asked. I shook my head. I was told the records were sealed, and part of me was afraid. What if he hated me for giving him up? 2 days later, I received an email that stopped my heart. The subject line read, "Looking for Caroline Callahan." The message was simple. "My name is James Bennett. I believe you might be my birth mother. I've been searching for you for 15 years. Attached was a photo of a man in his 40s with my father's height and David's kind eyes. He lived in Chicago, was a pediatric surgeon, and had 2 daughters of his own. He'd found me through one of those DNA ancestry websites. A distant cousin had made the connection. We arranged to meet the following weekend at a cafe halfway between our homes. The night before, Mark showed up at my door, flowers in hand, apology prepared. But it wasn't the groveling performance that surprised me. It was his ashen face, his genuine distress. "Caroline, I had no idea," he said, voice shaking. "After you left, Ellie told me everything. About your father, about being homeless." He swallowed hard. "My own father was similar to yours. I've spent my life trying to be nothing like him, but last night, I was exactly like him." I didn't invite him in, but I did accept the flowers. "Mark, I don't need your apology for my sake, but you need to take a hard look at how you treat people, especially your family. The meeting with James was surreal. Sitting across from this stranger who had my blood, my father's chin, David's gentle manner. He didn't hate me. Instead, he thanked me. You gave me to parents who could provide what you couldn't at 17, he said. They told me about you, that you were young but brave, that you wanted me to have opportunities. He showed me pictures of his daughters, my granddaughters, and told me about his search. When I finally found articles about Caroline Callahan going missing, I discovered you had essentially disappeared too. But then, a second cousin match on a DNA site led me to your stepsister Jenna, who had done one of those ancestry tests. As we talked, I felt decades of shame and regret begin to loosen their grip. James had questions, but no accusations. He had a good life. And now, unexpectedly, our separate worlds were merging. Ellie met him the following week. They connected instantly, sharing the same laugh, the same inquisitive nature. Watching them together, I felt a strange wholeness I hadn't known was possible. 3 weeks after Mark's disastrous revelation, Ellie called to tell me they were starting marriage counseling. I don't know if we'll make it, she admitted, but I'm not ready to give up without trying. As for me, I finally visited my parents' graves, something I'd never done before. I didn't forgive them, exactly, but I left the burden of their judgment there among the granite and withered flowers. Caroline Callahan was no longer a shameful secret, but simply part of my story. A young girl who survived, who made impossible choices, who built a life worth living. James invited me to Chicago to meet his adoptive parents. They embraced me with unexpected warmth, grateful rather than resentful of my place in their son's life. We've always known he was meant to find you someday, his mother told me. The photo albums I'd so carefully crafted for the anniversary party found a new purpose. I added to them old newspaper clippings about the Callahans, the Polaroid of baby James, pictures of our reunion. The complete story, no longer sanitized, no longer hidden. Sometimes the things we run from the hardest end up being our salvation. My maiden name, once a source of such shame, led my son back to me and finally freed me from decades of secrecy. That Google search Mark intended as a weapon became the key that unlocked a whole new chapter of my life. I now have Sunday dinners with both my children when James visits, and his daughters call me Grandma Caroline alongside Ellie's kids. Mark and I have reached a fragile truce. He's working on himself, and I'm learning that forgiveness isn't about forgetting, but about choosing to move forward. The truth doesn't always destroy us. Sometimes it rebuilds us, stronger and more authentic than before. If you're carrying a secret that's become too heavy, consider setting it down. You might find, as I did, that what awaits isn't judgment, but understanding, not rejection, but connection. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe for more real-life experiences and share it with someone who might need to hear that their past doesn't define their future. Remember, it's never too late for a new beginning.